Let's get into it now. A spoiler-free movie review of They Will Kill You, one of the most original movies I've seen this year. What a wild theater experience. I first saw the trailer for this a couple of months ago, going to see another movie, and I thought, I don't know what that is. Not familiar with the director, but it had such high, intense violence and blood splatter. Kind of reminded me of Kill Bill meets Ready or Not, meets a little bit of John Wick. And I thought, I have to be a part of that movie and go and see that when it comes out in theaters. And it did deliver. What the movie is about, you have Zazie Beetz' character, who you may remember her from Atlanta, which I loved her in. She was also in Deadpool 2. She did an episode of Black Mirror. She was also in the first Joker, had a small appearance in Joker 2. But her character went to prison, gets out, and then gets a job as a maid to go work at this place called the Virgil, which is this really high end kind of apartment style building where a lot of wealthy people live. She is on a mission to rescue her sister, but what starts out as a rescue mission turns into full out mayhem when she stumbles upon this satanic cult that lives within the walls of the Virgil. So it gets crazy. In the trailer, I won't spoil anything, but in the trailer, you see her fighting a lot of people in her room, and it is really crazy stylistic violence. So, who this movie is for? It is for me. I love horror movies. I feel like it's had a big resurgence in the last just 2 years of being one of the most creative genres. And the resurgence has been in the horror comedy space where you go see a movie and its intention really isn't to frighten you anymore, which I think some people think horror movies supposed to be scary. Not always the case, especially now, where I think horror is so flexible in what it can give you, whether it comes to the emotions or the actions. And there is this style of movie that is existing right now in the horror space that has a little bit of comedy, which I think is important, has a little bit of action, and then mixes in some pretty dark elements to make it a horror movie. I would probably credit this a little bit to Sam Raimi. So maybe if you saw Send Help earlier this year, kind of in that same style, except They Will Kill You is so much more disturbing and bizarre. But I think this movie style is really thriving right now where people want to go to the theater and have a good time and watch a movie that doesn't take itself too seriously, but also doesn't paint you out to be a dummy as the viewer, which is a really fine line to walk because it is so off the wall. If you go into it with a closed mind and think this is dumb, this is ridiculous, this is too cartoonish, this feels like a live action anime, which was one of the things that really stick out to me and what I loved about it. I just got back into One Piece on Netflix, fully loving that. It kind of reminded me a little bit of Attack on Titan. If Dragon Ball had bloodshed, it would remind me a little bit more of that. But anything that has a lot of swords and gun violence, that is what I feel is the source material for this movie. So it's just a lot of fun. So if you like horror movies, if you like comedy movies, if you like anime, or if you like video games, because the other thing that really stuck out to me was how all of the levels and different rooms inside of the Virgil kind of felt like a video game level. And I know they did draw some inspiration from Dante's Inferno and the adaptation of that video game, of the different levels of hell that you kind of experience. It kind of had that feeling of putting you inside of that action. Maybe if you were playing an old school Mortal Kombat game or like a Tekken fighting game, one of those old school 2000s, maybe even arcade video games, where it is that style of over the top violence and over the top bloodshed that I was craving for as a kid in the 90s and early 2000s. That is what I felt while I was watching this movie. It felt very organic, it felt very alive. They used a lot of practical effects. I'm talking crazy amounts of blood splatter and blood clouds, where I think that's what kind of gave me the vibes of like a Kill Bill martial arts style movies like back in the day. I feel like that was a big reference point and inspiration behind a lot of these scenes. So I very much got Uma Thurman inside of Zazie Beetz' character, but then it kind of takes on this entire mind of its own because it comes to us from a director from Russia who I'm not that familiar with, but I find really interesting. His name is Kirill Sukolov. His story is crazy because he started out as a scientist in college and then started making DIY movies with his friends. and decided this is what I want to do. He put out a movie that came out back in 2019 called Why Don't You Just Die? That was really successful, really put him on the map. And now he is getting to show everybody this is my style. Take it or leave it. This movie is so unapologetic that I loved how much it was committed to the style, which I know it might not be for everybody because it does get pretty twisted, especially in the third act. If you don't like anything that has any kind of demonic presence or satanic cult like, even though it is not indulging in it. It is more, I would say, poking fun at it. But some people just don't like watching that type of imagery. I get that because the way it is used in this movie, it's shown as the evil force, and the character of Asia, played by Zazie Beetz, is trying to take that evil force down. But in order to have such a crazy evil force, you have to depict them in this way. So I don't really feel like it's here is this really dark, twisted imagery. I am supporting this. I am supporting the person taking that demonic presence down and taking down all these sick, twisted individuals that live inside this building. The thing I wasn't expecting to work so well in They Will Kill You was the cast. You have Patricia Arquette, you have Heather Graham, and you have Tom Felton. Oh, Draco Malfoy from Harry Potter. I have never seen him in a movie like this. And you combine all these different personalities and actors that you know from vastly different things, from Harry Potter to Boogie Nights and The Hangover to Severance. And you think, how would there be any world where all these people could exist in one movie and it work? And somehow it does. I think even the style of acting caught me a little off guard in the beginning of this movie, where I did feel it was a little jarring at the start, where it just kind of threw you into this world, didn't really explain a whole lot, and kind of went back and forth between timelines. In the beginning, there was like a time slate of kind of telling you where it was, but the intro of the movie kind of felt mashed together. Even once the action starts picking up, it kind of comes out of nowhere. But I think because the movie is under 90 minutes and it had a lot of action to fit in there, that was the only way to get the story going without boring you. But I ended up enjoying the way that it played out from the beginning because it didn't waste a whole lot of time giving you the backstory on this building and why it is the way it is. Because if they did that, that would have been boring. This building, the Virgil, just exists. There's some crazy things going on within the walls. You learn about the details you need to learn about, and everything else you don't need a history lesson on, which I find so boring in horror movies when they dig into all the history of whoever lived there back 100 or 200 years ago. And there's this big exposition on details you don't really need. The tone shift all the way throughout this movie, where it feels a little bit comedic at times, sometimes within the same sentence, which I found really interesting, where a character will start delivering a line that feels funny, and then they kind of snap back into this dramatic tone. Then it feels a little bit more horror movie. It goes all over the place, so much so that I kind of feel like this movie was designed for people with a short attention span. The TikTok generation, people who will instantly swipe out of a video, people who have not made it this far in this review, because at any moment there is something happening. And if you don't like what is happening within that moment, in about 4 or 5 minutes, that scene is going to change. The action is going to develop. There's going to be another character thrown into the mix. So your brain is just kind of the entire time because there is so much happening. And you never really feel like the movie drags at any point because there is no time to. And there's so much story to fit in. It just really feels like wham, bam, thank you, ma'am. And you're out of there. And then by the end of it, you're wondering, what in the world did I just watch? Am I going to have nightmares tonight? Or am I going to laugh at myself when thinking about some of the most ridiculous moments, like body parts becoming a character within the movie? So I think if you go into this movie with an open mind, don't ask a lot of questions. And I'm not saying that as a way to maybe mask some of the style of filmmaking of, oh, don't pay attention to any plot holes. I'm just saying, don't question every little detail, which I find myself doing that makes me like a movie less. Because if I went into this movie with a little bit more cynicism and thought, why is this building here? Why hasn't it been condemned? Who pays the rent at this building? If there are some really crazy things going on, Why haven't the police showed up? It to me feels more like a dark fairy tale that kind of exists in its own world. I don't see this story taking place in our universe. It's kind of like a bizarro universe. It kind of reminded me of one of my favorite Goosebumps episodes from back in the 90s, Attack of the Mutant, where there was this building that would pop up out of nowhere. The kid would go discover it, and there was this crazy mutant living inside of it. And then when he would leave the building, it would disappear. I remember the first time I saw that episode, it blew my mind because I was convinced that there was this building out by this lot where we lived that would appear and reappear. It was all inside my head. But that kind of reminds me of the Virgil in this movie of it's this building. Maybe it's there when all this action is going down, but when you go back, it's completely gone. Again, also kind of reminded me of the Continental in John Wick, so another parallel there. So if you are a fan of horror, if you like really over the top violence in the style of Kill Bill, it kind of feels like I don't want to say he was doing a Quentin Tarantino impression, but you can really see the influence of Quentin Tarantino inside of They Will Kill You. For this movie, I give it 4 out of 5 eyeballs.